Law enforcement officers are trained to face danger. They expect criminals. They expect violence. They expect chaos. What they don't expect are moments that break logic, calls that don't make sense, locations that feel wrong, and encounters that stay with them long after the badge comes off. These stories come from officers who responded to routine calls and walked into something far more disturbing. Story 1. The call that answered itself. A night shift dispatcher at a rural sheriff's office received a 911 call just after 2:00 a.m. The line was open, but no one spoke. All that could be heard was faint breathing. The dispatcher tried to get a response. Nothing. The call traced back to an abandoned farmhouse outside town, one that had been empty for years. Two deputies were sent to check it out. When they arrived, the house was dark and silent. No vehicles, no lights, no movement. As they stood outside, the radio on one deputy's shoulder crackled. Dispatch spoke. "We're getting another call from your location." Before they could respond, the radio played audio. It was their own voices, live, coming back through the speaker with a slight delay. Then a third voice joined in. "Quiet. Calm. I can see you." The deputies left immediately. When the call logs were reviewed later, the original 911 call had no phone number attached. It simply read, "Call origin. Unknown." Story 2. The prisoner who was never logged. A state trooper transported a suspect late at night after a traffic stop on an empty highway. The man was cooperative. Calm. Almost too calm. During the drive, the trooper tried to make small talk. The man answered politely, but something felt off. His responses were slightly delayed, as if he was listening to someone else before replying. When they arrived at the station, the trooper escorted him inside. That's when the desk officer froze. "There's no intake record," he said. The trooper assumed it was a system issue. He looked back toward the holding area. The prisoner was gone. No door alarms, no camera footage, no record the man had ever entered the building. The dashcam footage from the patrol car was reviewed. The back seat was empty for the entire drive. The trooper was placed on leave for weeks. He still insists he spoke to someone the entire way. Story 3. The welfare check with no exit. Police were dispatched to a welfare check at an apartment complex after neighbors reported hearing constant movement but never seeing the tenant leave. The officer knocked. No answer. The door was unlocked. Inside, the apartment was spotless, too clean. No food, no personal items, no signs of long-term living. But footsteps could be heard, moving from room to room. The officer called out. The footsteps stopped, then started again. Behind him, he turned. Nothing. His radio suddenly lost signal. Then the door slammed shut on its own. The officer drew his weapon and exited through a back window. When backup arrived, the apartment door was sealed shut from the inside. Property records later showed the unit had been officially vacant for over 5 years. Story 4. The woods don't like. Radios. Park rangers and local deputies responded to a lost hiker report in a vast wooded area with poor reception. Search teams moved in pairs. One deputy reported strange radio interference, voices bleeding through channels that didn't belong to anyone on the team. At one point, a voice came through clearly. "Stop using the radio." The deputy assumed it was a prank. Minutes later, another officer went missing. No scream, no call for help, just silence. When the missing officer was found hours later, he was unharmed, but shaken. He said he heard voices guiding him off the trail. They spoke calmly. They knew his name. Search operations in that area now forbid radio use after sunset. Story 5. The body cam that recorded too much. During a nighttime burglary response, an officer entered a commercial building alone. His body cam was active. Inside, he heard movement upstairs. He announced himself. No response. As he climbed the stairs, the body cam audio picked up whispering, too faint to understand. Suddenly, the officer stopped moving. The footage shows him standing still for nearly 2 minutes. Then he says quietly, "It's telling me to turn around." He exited the building immediately. Later review of the footage revealed something chilling. During the 2 minutes of silence, a second set of footsteps could be heard, circling him. No person was ever found inside. Story 6. The officer who responded to his own call. A veteran police officer nearing retirement responded to a late-night disturbance call in a residential area. The address belonged to a house that had burned down years earlier. Dispatch insisted the call was real. When the officer arrived, the lot was empty. Then his radio crackled. Dispatch spoke again, but the voice was wrong. It was his voice, reading the call details back to him, slowly, word for word. The officer drove away immediately. When he checked the call log later, the incident number didn't exist. The officer retired the following month. He says he still hears his radio at night, even though it's been turned off for years. Final thought: law enforcement officers see humanity at its worst, but sometimes they encounter something else entirely. Something that doesn't resist, doesn't run, doesn't threaten. It just waits for someone in uniform to show up. And when it does, there's no training for that. Police officers are trained to expect danger from people. What they aren't trained for are moments when the danger doesn't behave like anything human. These are the calls officers still talk about quietly, usually after midnight. Story 7. The patrol car that locked itself. A city patrol officer stopped on a quiet street late at night to complete paperwork. No calls, no movement, just streetlights and empty houses. Without warning, the patrol car doors locked. The officer tried the controls. Nothing responded. Then the engine shut off. The radio turned on by itself. A voice came through. Not dispatch. You're parked in the wrong place. The officer demanded assistance, but his mic wouldn't transmit. Outside the car, he saw movement in the reflection of nearby houses, shapes shifting where no one stood. Suddenly, the car unlocked. The engine started. When the officer drove away, he noticed deep handprints on the rear windows. Pressed from the outside, no one had been there. Story 8. The interview room with no camera. A suspect was brought in for questioning after being found wandering near an industrial zone. He had no ID and wouldn't give his name. He was placed in interview room 3. When detectives attempted to review the camera feed, they realized something strange. Room 3 had no cameras. It never had. But officers distinctly remembered watching the suspect on a monitor. When they returned to the room, it was emptied. No open doors, no alarms, no record of release. Later that night, a janitor reported hearing someone speaking softly inside interview room 3. The room was sealed and has not been used since. Story 9. The call from the empty school. Police responded to a silent alarm at an abandoned elementary school scheduled for demolition. Inside, hall lights flickered on one by one. As officers moved through the building, footsteps echoed from classrooms. Children's laughter played faintly over the PA system. Officers cleared the building. N01 inside. As they exited, one officer noticed chalk writing on a blackboard near the entrance. It read, "You came too late." The alarm system was later inspected. It had been disconnected years earlier. Story 10. The deputy who wouldn't cross the line during a rural patrol. A deputy noticed a damaged fence along a field. He stopped to inspect it. His radio crackled. Dispatch warned him not to cross the fence. Confused, the deputy asked why. Dispatch replied, "That area isn't on your map anymore." The deputy noticed something odd. The land beyond the fence looked normal, but sound seemed muted. Wind moved, but made no noise. He stepped closer. His radio screamed with static. Then one clear sentence. "If you cross, you won't be dispatched back." The deputy backed away. When records were checked later, the fence line didn't exist on any zoning map, but missing person reports did, all from beyond that field. Story 11. The body cam that kept recording after shift. An officer finished a late shift and returned home. He docked his body cam as usual. Hours later, the system flagged new footage. The body cam had turned on by itself. The footage showed a hallway. Dark, narrow, unfamiliar. Footsteps approached the camera. A voice whispered, "Badge or not, you're still seen." The officer was at home the entire time. The hallway has never been identified. Story 12. The officer who heard his name in roll call during morning roll call. An officer responded when his name was called. The room went silent. The sergeant looked confused. "I didn't call you," he said. The officer insisted he heard his name clearly, spoken from behind him. Later that day, dispatch received a routine status check. It was from the same officer. Timestamped 2 hours in the future. The officer resigned. Within a week, he says he still hears his name, spoken calmly, whenever he's alone. Final warning. Police are trained to observe, report, and respond. But sometimes, something else is already responding. Before the call is made, before the officer arrives, before the radio even turns on. And whatever it is, it knows procedure.